Good night, everyone. Hi, how are you doing? This is Seda Röder from the Entrepreneur. I'm looking forward to tonight's guest. Trent McConaghy is going to be at the other end of the line in just 1 second. But before we start, I want you to know that we're streaming to all sorts of different channels, to YouTube, to Facebook, here on Mindshift TV. And I would really appreciate you if you showed your appreciation through likes and through follows on our Facebook page and on our Twitter. Um, and that's lovely to hear from you. Also, we have Slido tonight too. We have the event code D273. If you have any questions, just let us know. And let's welcome Trent. Hi, Trent. How are you?
Hello, yes, I'm very well. How are you?
Fine, thank you very much. So, Trent, you're one of the most brilliant minds, actually, when it comes to blockchain technology, but also in combination with AI, in terms of scaling of the blockchain technology. I want to know a little bit about your background. You are the co-founder of BigChainDB, of Ocean Protocol. So let's just talk about how everything started. But before you answer, you have to take on the challenge of, I know you're not much into cooking, but so what will you be preparing, Trent?
So I'm going to simply be preparing muesli and yogurt-based breakfast,
Oh,
but I like to have that as an evening snack as well. Um, so I have my muesli, and I have my yogurt, and I have my bowl, and I have my mixing spoon.
Well,
So
what else would you need? Actually, you have only two ingredients, but I'm sure in the muesli there's stuff, right?
that's right. And actually, there is a special thing. You actually need two spoons, one for the mixing and for scooping the yogurt, and one for eating the yogurt. So that's one of the special tricks.
That's
So
awesome. So that's a great start. You're already hacking.
exactly.
Yeah, and I will be doing a Turkish dish actually, which is a side dish. If you're doing some meat, then you can have it. It's a bean salad. It's a very simple dish. So I was being asked, why don't you cook something Turkish? So it's not real cooking. It's just putting things together. But I can explain as I go. So, but let's go back to the beginnings. How did it all come together?
Yeah, well, I guess uh, for a lot of my life, I've been coding since I was pretty young, writing video games for fun, that sort of thing. And I studied electrical engineering, and straight out of undergrad, I started my first company in AI. I'd been hacking on AI before that. And so I did a couple of companies on AI, as well as a PhD in it, from the mid 90s to until the early 2010s. So I spent a lot of time in the AI world, basically.
But what
And
was it that brought you to artificial intelligence as a
yeah,
topic?
well, yeah, it's a great question. So overall, I'm a huge nerd, and I love to follow all these different technologies. And AI always resonated with me ever since I was really quite young. I saw that, at first it was just like, this is cool or whatever because you're young, but I realized I kind of reverse engineer going backwards, and it's sort of like I see it as a big lever for changing the world to make it a better place. Technology in general is a big lever. And then if you can have a general purpose technology that can have quite profound implications, then it's potentially very interesting, and that's really what AI is, because it has a lot to say about what is the role of humans now and in the future, what is the role of creativity. And it has many other really interesting questions, and also a whole bunch of cool technical challenges that are fun to try to work with your brain. So.
Hmm. I remember one of the quite controversial talks you gave at one of our gatherings at Sonophilia. And I also remember you saying creativity is really important, but you can't just, think you're creative today and then, put your feet up and be really relaxed. And you were like, even the creatives are going to be put out of job.
Yeah, yeah.
The only job that's going to be like forever is the job of an AI researcher. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, that talk ruffled a few feathers. But it's kind of, I mean, I guess it was blunt truth. I did a PhD in creative AI, so and I have a lot of friends who have worked on it too. Um, what is creativity? Actually, if you go back to the 50s, there was a big movement in the mid 50s to the mid 60s about mechanizing creativity. One of my favorite books of all time is a book called Applied Imagination, which has been out of print since forever, but my mother owned it. And it talks about all the different ways that you can sort of take ideas, recombine them, make two different lists of things, and then just combine them and all the combinations and ask what's interesting. And sort of every few pages had different techniques about how to be creative, and that's just
Mm-hmm.
doing it as a human. And if you happen to know about this book or other related ideas, then you can generate ideas quite quickly, and that's sort of the brainstorming part. But then you can apply criteria to filter and focus on the high quality ideas. And in a sense, what creative AI is doing is something kind of similar, where it's very, very rapidly going through tons and tons and tons of ideas. I did a lot of work on automated design of analog circuits, which is considered a creative art, if you will.
Mm-hmm.
There's hundreds of patents, if not thousands, every year on analog circuit design. And actually, kind of what pulled me into AI professionally was when I was an undergrad, I had just walked out of an analog design class. And I was reading a paper on AI, and it talked about using AI to design analog circuits automatically. And I thought, my first thought was, oh man, am I screwed, right? Am I out of a job before I even start looking for a job? And my second thought was, if you can't beat them, join them. And so I made a point of meeting that researcher. In the next year, I drove 16 hours straight one day to go to a conference that he was at, and I met him, and he said, "Yeah, I'm not an electrical engineer, but I'm looking for them. So maybe we can work together." And I ended up becoming quite good friends with him, and iterating with him a lot throughout my career. And I used a lot. I took a lot of what he had done and just made it sort of way more efficient and useful for the real world. So that was a bit of my early introduction to sort of AI with real world application, and this was the late 90s, early 2000s. On the creativity thing, going back to that, yeah, so there's lots of. I was doing it for analog circuits, but other people have done it for designing new quantum circuits, or designing optical circuits, or reinventing previous patents
Mm-hmm.
that have been done, or more recently with all this stuff in deep learning, people have been using it to generate art, and we're seeing this with things like deep fakes and really interesting things happening in art there.
Yeah.
So there's a whole variety of things that computers can do. It's uh, so we as humans like to think that we're the only folks that are creative, but a lot of creativity can be mechanized, is the point, right? And
Yeah,
we don't want to hear that, because
that's
it's cognitive dissonance,
yeah,
but it's true.
absolutely. That's true. My company is doing this project with Beethoven's 10th, um,
Yeah.
and sometimes you get all these, really angry looking faces, and they are like, how dare you try to emulate or even claim to do something that's going to reach the genius of an artist like Beethoven, etc. And I'm like, you're all missing the point. It's not the point. The point is, if the starting point is not this low, but you start at a very high level, then comes the question, how far can your imagination go, right?
Yes.
And then you suddenly open up totally new paths of unimaginable, thinking, and then you really have to force yourself into a state of mind where you can actually ignore everything that you know is true. I mean, true for today.
Hmm.
So I think that's a very difficult exercise for a lot of people to be able to imagine something um, but also I also know your other claim that says, for anything where you tell us yes, but I'm going to show you at least 10 examples of people who are doing exactly that, of that thing that you think is impossible to do. And one of those things is ocean protocol. So let's talk about that. I mean, how did you come with the decentralization? How did Ocean Protocol come about?
Yeah.
And let's talk about that a little bit, because owning your data is like unimaginable for
Yeah.
us.
Yeah. So overall, I've been, a friend of mine in the AI community who also happened to be a crypto security researcher, tipped me off on Bitcoin back in 2010, and then myself and some friends followed it quite fanatically. We'd even, all committed one day to spend a bunch of money and buy Bitcoin, and then we went to try it on Mount Gox, and it was so hard to do that none of us did it back in 2010. I did buy a small handful, but I lost the keys to that long ago. Then in 2013, I started spending more time in Berlin and I started hanging out at the very first place in the world that accepted Bitcoin for anything, like bricks and mortar place. And this was a place called Room 77 in Berlin. And not only did they accept Bitcoin, they accepted Bitcoin for beer. So I was very happy about that. I went to this place and there was a meetup, and everyone in there was talking about Bitcoin
Yeah.
and blockchain. And it was quite interesting because up until then I'd thought about Bitcoin and hadn't really spent real time at it except for just talking with friends. But when I learned that blockchain, the underlying technology of Bitcoin was just one application with sort of money, store of value, all of this. But there were so many other applications once you think about the blockchain side. And I was thinking about that a lot. And then this was mid 2013. And myself and one of my co-founders, Masha, who you know, of course, too, we were hanging out one day. She's an art professional. We had just toured a gallery, and she had been seeing this issue of digital art. Uh, you know, this question of how do you collect digital art? How do you own digital art? How do you compensate the artists who are creating digital art? And we kind of looked at each other, and she'd been talking about this, we'd been talking about this. Then I sort of went on and on about Bitcoin for a bit, as I often do, and she's very patient. And 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 then we kind of looked at each other and asked, what if you could own digital art the way that you own Bitcoin? And that turned out to be a great question to ask. And that's kind of what we got, that we kind of pulled on the thread. And it turned out to be a very rich thread to keep pulling on and learning. And that's what led us to the project of Ascribe, which was about owning digital art the way that you own Bitcoin. We pulled in a third co-founder, Bruce, who had also known for 20 years, going back to growing up in rural Canada. And we pursued this. So that was in 2013. And kind of related, this question of what does it mean to own digital art? Well, it actually turns out that there's an answer that precludes blockchain, and it is simply it's IP, intellectual property, right? So with music, say if you're a musician, you can write a song and perform it, and you get copyright for those things, right? As those things get manifested on a song sheet or in a recording. And once you have that copyright, then you can license this out to others, and it's a contract, right? So I can license to you, for example, the ability to you play that for your own personal consumption. Yeah. Or I can, license it to a music label, and they have the right to manufacture more examples and sell that to others. So the idea of copyright plus licenses, is really the basis. And so then what blockchain does is you can embed these claims, these copyright claims, these licensing contracts, all this into blockchain technology, claim that you've done it, and so on. And that's and then also when you have art marketplaces and so on, the art marketplace itself doesn't have to be centralized. There's no sort of middleman that can control what's going on in between. So in the end, it's instead you've got this public utility infrastructure, just sort of like the internet or the electric grid, that kind of no one fully owns or controls, but collectively together, it's a very powerful thing. And that's really what public blockchains are about, like Bitcoin or Ethereum. And so, yeah.
And so the inspiration was like from using blockchain for art and for intellectual property, and then you started to apply it to also other companies, and you put when you headed towards this scaling problem, you put AI on top of it, and it became the big chain DB.
Yeah, so the big chain part didn't have AI. It was just basically we started as we went from digital art, we were looking to expand to serving the world of photography well, and that was a lot higher volume than art. And that the cost of doing a transaction on Bitcoin had gone from like zero 0.1 cents to 1 cent to 10 cents in the span of sort of the year and a half we were working on the project, 2 years. And that was then starting to get infeasible because some photography marketplaces that we were dealing with were going through 10,000 or 100,000 photos a day. And so just, storing to this database, if you will, called Bitcoin, would have been prohibitive. And so we started asking ourselves, how can we scale this better? We looked around, we saw that, well, there's traditional distributed databases like MongoDB. Let's decentralize one of those. And that's exactly what we did. And that became BigchainDB. And, it turns out that a lot of people had the same problem as us, scaling blockchain. It's still a hot topic. The world has progressed a long ways, but with BigchainDB, we basically, found a way to scale blockchain for database-y applications, less so the smart contracts and all that, but more if you just have records that you want to store, all that, then BigchainDB was a very nice, clean solution to do that. So yeah, we basically pivoted from Ascribe to BigChain. And then from that, it evolved into Ocean when we started realizing that, we started realizing a few things. This issue of sovereign personal data, where we as individuals see that we don't really have great control over data. And we see that others are sort of taking advantage of that. That's kind of part of it. But then also we see that there's, if you're an AI person, you're like, I want data, right? Like you're building these AI models. AI loves data, especially the modern deep learning AIs and all this. And yet at the same time, it's really hard to get your hands on data as an AI person. So how do you connect the people who want the data, the AI people, with the people who have the data, which could be consumers, or it could be even big enterprises, if you can find a way to unlock their data. And that's really what Ocean Protocol is about, is connecting the data haves with the data have-nots.
So it's a platform?
It's a platform. That's one way to think about it. If you're a developer, you develop on it. It leverages, lower level blockchain technology. Also, we're in the process we're about to be shipping a decentralized marketplace for data itself, right? So with a web page, all this. So basically, you can go on there and you can search around and look for data sets to buy and sell and stuff. We've already shipped decentralized sort of Ocean Commons, where basically people can upload, and point to free data, but the marketplace is coming soon.
That's very interesting. How do I, as a just private person, know, whether I own my data or not, or who is using it exactly? I mean, that's very. We all know in the context of big players like. How do you say it? Facebook, or LinkedIn's, etc., of this world, or Google's of this world. We all know that if you're not paying for the service, you are probably contributing. You are probably the part of the product, right, being sold to third parties. But the moment when you leave that wrong as a private person, how do you know whether or not you're owning your data, and what can you do actually with your data other than giving it away for free? What are the alternatives? What is that life like?
Yeah, so in terms of the value of data, there's the value of individuals, which you're pointing to, and I'll talk more on that. There's also value of businesses, small or large, and of governments, right? So in all three cases, it's either been locked down and poorly exploited, or opened up in a way that it's been exploited in a way where the true data owner isn't really getting great benefits, right? So on your question then, for the sort of the consumer level, how I see it is, people are making this trade-off now. Some realize they're making the trade-off, some not, where they're giving up a lot of the rights to their data in return for essentially connecting to their friends in a convenient way and whatnot, right? And with Facebook and the like, and Google too, having search, etc. And so that said, some of these services like Google Search are obviously very beneficial to humanity. So, it's a pretty big trade-off to stop doing that. There are alternatives like DuckDuckGo, of course, which are pretty good.
What is it called?
DuckDuckGo. It's an
DuckDuckGo.
alternative.
Okay.
Yeah, it's an alternative to Google search that does not track you.
Okay.
And it's pretty good actually.
Mhm.
So then the question is like that you had asked, can we monetize it? Well, do we have the rights to it? If we do have the rights to it, can we monetize it, etc. So do we have rights to it? It's a bit of a gray area question.
Mhm.
You have copyright rights to things when you have had sweat off the brow to generate it. So if you are extracting data from yourself where it takes some sweat off the brow, then you definitely have the rights to it. And then depending on the jurisdiction, sometimes just data that emanates from you as a person is yours as well, but it really depends on the jurisdiction.
Mhm.
Um, but then, how the terms of service that you click on when you sign up to Facebook and whatever, those terms of service basically say, we're going to take all your data.
Mhm.
Even Zoom, which we're using right now, is actually saying we're going to take all your data. It's pretty aggressive on that because they see it as a path to monetization. More
Mhm.
data means better AI models to target ads better, which means higher click-through rate, which means more revenue.
Mhm.
Basically, more data means more money for Facebook and Zoom and stuff.
Sorry, I just
Mhm.
really want to talk about this part because
Yeah.
what really boggles my mind is it looks like we are a very far advanced species. We talk about AI, we talk about creative AI, we talk about all sorts of different models. But then when it comes to the business model of the internet, there is nothing better than we can do than sell ads.
Yeah, it's a great question actually. So people, if you go back to the web one, there was no business model because commerce hadn't really been properly cracked yet. It was really only sort of at the late stages of web one, early stages of web two, where secure payments came through. That was HTTPS, adding the S.
Mhm.
And with that, even it was pretty clunky. So it was pretty hard to have sort of a seamless interface to for consumers to buy, especially with micropayments, all this that you might imagine. So a lot of the ideas for business models just had too much friction, whereas the advertising business model didn't require friction on the part of the consumer. So it kind of just really blew up, and that has been the predominant business model. Now we're starting to see other ones that are sort of Web 2E as well, things like the cloud and mobile, right? Mobile apps, all that. But even mobile, a lot of the business model there is ads.
Mhm.
One thing that excites me about Web3 and blockchain is that you actually get much more secure payment rails with the potential to be much lower friction, much better UX, and all of that. And we're starting to see early examples of that
Mhm.
with things like this emerging movement of decentralized finance, DeFi,
Mhm.
where people sort of can have loans and give out loans, take loans, and have stable coins, all this sort of thing. It's pretty early days though, but that's exciting overall because it points to a much broader set of possible business models
Mhm.
with the web. So Web3 is really useful or interesting, not just from a technology standpoint, but also a business model standpoint, right? So there's these books about business model design, things like business model generation, all of this, business
Mhm.
canvases. Um, those will get huge updates when you incorporate Web3 stuff. And we're really in early days of Web3 business models, but there's some interesting ones already. And that's exciting for consumers because if many of these new business models are going to be friendly to consumers. In general, Web3 is much more about aligning the interests of all the stakeholders in an ecosystem. So the
Mhm.
consumers' interests are aligned with the interests of the social media site, are aligned with the creators, etc. And they each get a piece of the success of it, basically.
Um, and when you go back to Ocean Protocol, so how that's more like a B2B type of platform, or is that also, is there a possibility for private people to kind of log into as well?
So the way that we're designing Ocean, sort of the platform side, the lower level, it's designed where anyone building apps on top can target those apps for consumers or for small and medium-sized enterprises, for large enterprises,
Mm-hmm.
and governments. Everywhere from the city level to the national government level, right? And so we're just trying to make it low friction across the board. And then at the same time, like I've mentioned, we're building this last mile marketplace that's really targeted towards the small and medium-sized enterprises and even large, I guess
Mm-hmm.
for decentralized buying and selling of data with some really compelling features. For example, buying and selling private data without compromising privacy or control, right? So
Ah.
that's actually
Mm-hmm.
super exciting. So I can sell you, I'm a big company, I can sell you my data, but that data never leaves my premises. And instead, you're just buying my data enough to get access to it to train your AI models next to my data.
Mm.
So that's pretty interesting, right? So overall, we're actually designing Ocean to support sort of the whole spectrum, right? And I gave the example for the marketplaces, but with cities, cities are talking about many cities want to become smart cities to be digitally native. What does
Mm.
that look like? Well, you really need a good data management infrastructure, right?
Yeah.
And probably the most famous example is Tallinn, which is essentially Estonia. And Estonia, they're very digitally native for a long time, and their baseline infrastructure is all about a data management system that goes back 20 years.
Hmm.
So, but if you were to build that technology today, then you would probably use blockchain rails, and it would start to look a lot like Ocean.
I also know that you guys are doing some corona relief work as well with Ocean. So let's talk about that because I know you're really serious about it.
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, like in the world of blockchain, a lot of people on blockchain sort of hedge and look at the future and think about exponentials, right? And so, myself and some of my colleagues, including Bruce, my co-founder, have been following it since sort of early mid-January very closely,
Mm-hmm.
seeing that it was, had been blowing up in China. It was an exponential that could blow up elsewhere. And then the first thing to do is sort of bound the downside, right, with safety for those around you, um, and then and also with financial and more, right? So safety with those around you. This is food, this is medical supplies, and so on. But once you sort of have that, then you're not so fear. You don't fear as much about the rest because you're prepared. Like a good Boy Scout, be prepared. But
Mm-hmm.
then, what can you do to help make a difference? So we've been racking our brains, asking ourselves, how can we help? How can we help? And I'd done a bit of modeling on the side, not even as part of Ocean, just some of the burning questions I had, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, is there a threshold at which hospital capacity runs out in Germany or elsewhere? And some of the numbers were, um, a little bit scary, frankly. But it was worth putting out there, and so I had done that. That's more than a couple weeks ago now, I think.
Mm-hmm.
But then, we started asking more questions like, how might this play out? What are the different scenarios? How can Ocean help? How can we help? And, there's clearly a bunch of different initiatives, things like, there's people trying to line up ventilators. There's people trying to line up, different drug trials for using different drugs and so on and so forth. So so that's great, right? The whole world is mobilized around this one problem, which is actually pretty exciting from many perspectives. Scary too, and there's a lot of
Uh,
craziness, but it's exciting too.
mm-hmm.
And so we asked, okay, given that the whole world is mobilizing, what can we bring to the picture that's interesting, unique, and so on?
Mm-hmm.
And then, we saw there's sort of a trade-off that we're seeing play out again and again, which is safety versus economics, right?
Yeah.
USA, for example, was very hesitant to even do anything at all because they were just trying to get the economy looking good, all of that, right?
Yeah.
You know, don't look, don't tell, which is a terrible policy. And that actually meant that coronavirus spread a lot in the USA, a lot
Mm-hmm.
more before the testing got in place. And even now, it looks like it looks like they're starting to encourage people to go back to their jobs, which is really very dangerous, right?
Mm-hmm.
There's definitely a trade-off between safety of your citizens and economy. At least that's what it appears like to the short-sighted, right? But if all your people get sick, and a lot of or a good chunk of people in your population get sick, and even pass on, then that can decimate your economy, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's a big trade-off. But there's a path through that, which is you do the lockdown, and then for 30 days, 60 days, 90 days, whatever it takes, and then you find ways to slowly open back up. And this is what Wuhan did. Looks like it's progressing well, but we don't know for sure yet. And others can follow suit.
Mm-hmm.
Ideally, though, you aggressively measure at first, and if you're not measuring at first, then you measure later, right? And this is what South Korea, Taiwan, they sort of been doing, where they're using data aggressively to find out where who might have coronavirus, and then they test them
Yeah.
aggressively, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then they quarantine them, et cetera, as needed. And what's interesting, Taiwan is probably the best example of all, where they've basically never had any shutdowns at all because they kind of nipped it in the bud initially. They tracked it very aggressively, all the cases. They looked at each case and they did contact tracing, which means finding, if person X has coronavirus, who had they been in contact with?
Yeah.
And then anyone who might have potentially been in contact, they simply tested them.
Yeah.
And so, and they did it in a way where it didn't compromise privacy too badly either. Most of it was voluntary data submission and whatnot. We're seeing other places that did it more aggressively, but it's actually helping a lot. So Korea,
Yeah.
South Korea
Because
is a great example. Go ahead. Yeah.
it's really interesting because it keeps coming up, especially when it comes to such disastrous situations, whether there is good dictatorship or not. Is there good surveillance?
Well, I think there's the competent government or not is the thing to think about, right? Like, I mean, you can look back to many of the great American presidents. Like Truman did amazing things. FDR did amazing things. The original Roosevelt, Teddy Roosevelt, did amazing things. The founding fathers of America, Washington and Adams and Ben Franklin. These people were amazing, right? And so it wouldn't it be great if we had the equivalent of an FDR or a Truman helping to run some of the most powerful countries? We're a bit luckier here in Germany, right? We have a PhD physicist who can think in exponentials, and that's super useful, right?
Yeah.
Um, but going back to this then, on this privacy thing, so China was aggressively tracing things, right? They had these sensors to see if people had fevers and all this, and a lot of the West looked at this and said, "Oh, this is too much. We're not going to do this." But they kind of ignored things too much, right? And overall, though, it kind of looks like, okay, if you do safety and then you kind of let your economy die, but you can keep privacy. Okay, so it's kind of a trade-off between these three things, right? Safety, privacy, or economy. Pick any two, right?
Yeah.
And that's what it looks like, right? So a lot, Germany has been going for safety and privacy, and the economy is kind of hurting. Hopefully that can come back. But other places like Israel or China are clearly basically compromising privacy. But they're getting on top of the safety side in a big way, and their economies are going to fare better. So, and my greatest concern actually is that I do see that privacy, a lot of the Western countries are going to compromise privacy in order to get it on top of safety and then the economy.
Yeah.
But I fear that, I think that's going to be useful in the near term, sort of as war measures.
Yeah.
But I fear that these war measures will last beyond a year or two, right? Beyond 6 months or 12 months or 24, because it's, governments love surveillance. And if they get the citizens used to it, that's super dangerous for democracy, right?
Yeah, that's right.
Because if the governments are tracking people aggressively, then people who don't like how the government is being run, they won't be able to gather in groups and make plans to protest against the government or more, right? So we need to figure out a way that gets all three, that gets safety, economy, and privacy, right?
I'm sure you have a way, but we have
Yes.
questions.
Yes. Okay, cool. Great.
We have questions here. So it's kind of going back slightly to what we've started out with on Slido. It says, what happens if the complexity of AI and decentralized platforms are so high that humans will no longer be able to understand them?
That's a cool question. Thank you to Anonymous for asking. Overall, the systems that sort of underlie the infrastructure of humanity are wildly complex, far beyond the comprehension of any one human, right? No one has a picture of how the whole world works, right? Probably the last time we had that was like, I don't know, Leonardo da Vinci or something, Renaissance man. But so now instead, different people know different pieces of the puzzle, right? And one way you can think about it as sort of a giant hierarchy of systems where and it can, these things organize bottom up or top down and in combination, right? So, some people are experts at circuits and even just analog circuits. Other people are experts at supply chains. Other people are experts at, gastro medicine, et cetera, et cetera. And so same thing with AI and decentralized platforms. There's some people who really know lots of AI. There's other people who really know lots of decentralization. There's some people who know lots of silicon, and even those combinations today are already so complex that no one person knows them all. The good thing is that there is abstraction, right? So when you get to higher and higher levels, you have abstraction with good UX, good user experiences, such that the people using them, consumers or otherwise, can handle it, right? 7 plus or minus 2 objects in their memory, if you will. And so that's really the answer. is that you just abstract away the complexity. Just like, when someone drives a car, they don't have to think about what's going on under the hood, with that internal combustion engine or electric, right? If you were to tell them that, there was thousands of
Yeah,
explosions
but
every few seconds,
mm,
they might resist, but that's actually what's going on.
that's true. But on the other hand, I mean, these systems are getting so complex that the legibility is just so over the top. I mean, when you sit in a car, you have an idea, and you're not constantly scared of using the car or the car turning against you. It's not like Herbie. Herbie was the car, right?
Yeah. Oh, there we go. Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. So in these other complex systems, it sometimes looks like, with all the surveillance, with the government, with all the complexity and ethics and codices, etc., it looks like there is no way. You feel like I'd rather just sit home and not use anything.
Yeah. So I mean, I think, yeah, I think overall, and most people will have to let go, and it sounds like a bitter pill to swallow, but I think it's true. And the good thing is, guess what? You've already let go in something even more important. That's even potentially, arguably more complex, and it's that mass of cells right behind your two eyeballs called your brain, right? No one understands the brain. We trust it. We use it, and we've learned to live with it and
We
work with
use
it,
it?
right?
Okay.
So, like most of us use it most of the time. Um, so, or at least we like to think so, I guess. So, yeah, I mean, I think
Yeah.
that's the answer, right? Like,
Yeah, let's look at the second question. What needs to happen for more humans to overcome this old kind of thinking where it's all about my capital, my production, my means, my customers, my money, etc.?
well, maybe a world shock like what we're seeing right now. I mean, the world is a very different place than it was 2 weeks ago, even, right?
Yeah.
So a lot of these traditional ideas are potentially going away, right? For example, the whole concept of debt is, not many more decades, not that many decades old, right? 50 years, 70 years, whatever is the bulk of it, right?
Mm.
And so and it's sort of that goes hand in hand with this idea of growth, this idea of growing and growing and growing all the time. And
Mm.
growth is nice in that it's sort of this rising tide that lifts all boats. As the economy grows, then everyone gets wealthier and standard of living rises and all that. Um, so, but at the same time, one of the big questions has been: is it sort of pushing us closer and closer to an edge that we might fall over? And
Mm.
maybe that's true, maybe not. We don't know how robust the system is. It's looking a bit shaky right now, right?
Yeah.
So one way is, just sort of a global level war. And make no mistake, we're at something right now where it's bigger than 911. In a global way. It's getting towards the levels of sort of World War II-ish stuff, right? Or,
Mm.
or more, right? Great Depression and stuff. So it feels kind of crazy. We're all encountering cognitive dissonance in this because our brains aren't used to something of this magnitude, right?
Yeah.
Um, it's kind of crazy that markets are talking about shutting down, whole countries are already shut down. I've been in lockdown for 2.5+ weeks already, etc.
Mm.
So uh, what will it take? I mean, I guess it's happening, right? There might have been other ways for it to happen, but it's happening. So, and the
Yeah.
idea of capital and production, everything is going to change.
All I hope is that we're not going to wake up one day, all of this is over, and then business as usual just continues. And that's the big fear, right? What happened to your food?
Yeah, I can show. I've got it here. So here we go. And there we
Yay.
go for your audience.
Yes.
There we go.
So look,
So
this is beans, and then there are red onions and just some olive oil and some lemon juice. So that's it.
okay,
And then you can eat this alone or uh, as a side dish to meat. That's the best. That's Turkish. It's called pilaki.
that's very cool. And mine is, well, yogurt and muesli with the small spoon. So
Yeah. That's so awesome. Trent, thank you so much for joining me tonight. And I'm really looking forward to reconnecting and talking about, how things are going to uh, um, resolve for you. One last question. What's next? So what's happening now for you?
What's next? Well, we see, on this sort of this triangle, this trade-off of three things, right? Safety,
Hmm?
economics, and privacy. In the near term, the Western world is going to give up privacy. I just see that it's going to happen. Can't really change that. But what we can do is make sure that 1 year, 2 years from now, when we start rebuilding the economy, that we reclaim privacy. It's super, super, super critical because otherwise we're going to totally threaten our democracies. So this is what we're racing towards with Ocean is basically making sure that Ocean is scalable well enough to help on the privacy side because Ocean is all about privacy preserving data sharing. This is exactly what we need. You
Hmm.
know, I wish that it didn't take the level of a pandemic in order to help drive and catalyze it. But this is where we can make the biggest difference. So it's sort of full steam ahead on that. Spending our efforts on making sure that we can serve the needs for privacy, especially with respect to health safety. And we're going to be moving forward with things like hackathons related to coronavirus and so on too.
Hmm.
To help unlock a lot of other people with great ideas. And there's a lot of people doing hackathons, of course. But
Yeah.
that's really what it's about for Ocean is secure, safe, privacy preserving data sharing. And yeah, we will all get through this. We will all build and build up and get through. And there will be a brighter times. And in the meantime, we can just stay vigilant and don't forget who we are.
Oh, that's so lovely. Perfect last words. Thank you so much, Trent. I'm looking forward to reconnecting after all of this is over and, drinking a coffee again and having those mind boggling discussions with you and Masha and
For sure.
Bruce. Guys, take care. Good night to Berlin. And thank you for joining at Entrepreneur's Kitchen.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Bye bye.
Bye.